Welcome to another Airbrush Asylum video. In this three-part tutorial video, I'm going to take you through the steps and show you how I airbrushed this artwork on the side cover of a Harley Trike. So this tutorial, as I mentioned, will be split up into three parts. Part 1, which is the one you're watching now, will feature all the underpainting. I'm showing you how to cut some of the stencils, so to prepare your paper templates to basically draw on the artwork. And then we're going to wrap up part 1 by adding some of the highlights to start to begin to shape the eagle design and already add some of those textures. Part 2, we're going to further shade everything, add some more tones and tonal values, and in part 3 we're going to finish off the design, adding all of the fine details. So be sure to check out all three parts, and I hope you do enjoy this tutorial video. And as you see here, I'm starting to prep up some of these paper templates. Now, you've probably seen me do this in other videos. What I tend to do is I find a reference image that I'm happy with. Basically, I've switched it into black and white for the purpose of making these templates. I adjust some of the brightness and contrast to make all the details pop. And then basically I'll just start to hand cut any of the darker shadows and create all those areas that I need so that I can accurately utilize some of those paper templates into the design. As I progress, I can go back and use those paper templates to hit those sharp edges and whatnot. So take your time. I didn't show you the complete process because it's a little bit boring if I focus on the whole like 5 minutes of just paper templates, but that's how I start off. And that's how I'm getting this design on there. So as you can see, I am utilizing the negative template, so the outside shape of that eagle. And the first color that I'm using is peach flesh. I've mixed this with reducer to my liking, not as thin as I'd mix up my other colors, as I want this to get a bit more coverage. And I've just sprayed in around the outer edge. You'll notice I've left the beak section, and I've also hit a couple of sort of key highlights. That's just going to help me to line up once I add the eyes and all that sort of stuff. So now I've switched to Payne's Grey and I'm just spraying in the area that I've left deliberately, which is the beak area of the eagle. So I'm not too concerned, trying to get it super duper accurate as far as where that colour ends. It sort of blends back into the peach flesh. That's all going to get hidden once I start adding more and more shading. I just wanted to have the two variables as my underpainting, rather than coating the whole thing with peach flesh and then coming in with the grey. So just going ahead and removing that negative template. So you can see here the eagle head starting to shape up. Now I'm utilizing another paper template which has all my darker values, and I'm going to come in with a bit of sepia brown and I'm going to start to airbrush those in. So it's just a good way using these paper templates rather than having to draw physically on the surface, and that way you never have to worry about trying to hide grey lead because you're only using paint. So the completed finished product, you know that it's going to be nice and clean. So you can see here, just starting on the eye there, and I've cut all the shapes and shadows that I need. So these, as I mentioned earlier, are the key sections. So this will just define where everything goes, and then I'll do a lot of freehand airbrushing just to further develop the artwork, adding in more tones and texturing and detailing as I go along. Okay, so now that I've got quite a bit of that sepia in those key areas, I'm switching to the brown-black mix that I've made up specifically for this project. I used a sepia brown and I mixed that with black. This is predominantly almost black. I mean, it really if you look at the bottle, it looks just like a nice thinned out black. However, with that the sepia mixed into it, just takes the edge off it a little bit. And it ties it back into this this artwork. And this colour I am using to further deepen some of the shadows. So anything that is extremely dark, that's what I'm using this for. So you'll notice that when I did that little part on the beak there, I didn't go completely over the top of it, so I might only be hitting those extreme dark sections. So go back to your reference, make sure you follow that, especially if you're trying to accurately replicate something like this. Okay, so we're just going to go ahead and remove that paper template now, revealing what stage we're up to so far, and you can already tell that I have all the key sections in place, and this is plenty for me to now further develop the design, add my detailing and build all the tones, shapes and shadows to create this eagle artwork. So the airbrush that I'm using now is the Iwata CM-SB Micron. This one runs a 0.18mm needle and it has a side cup. I have heavily thinned my Trident white airbrush paint, so I would normally run at about 18 psi for this particular airbrush, with a paint consistency of about 30% paint, 70% reducer. And I highly recommend you always use whichever brand paint you're using, always use their corresponding reducer. Do not thin the paints with water, as you'll compromise their viscosity, and you're going to have, it's just not going to flow as nicely. You're going to have more tip drying issues. The paint can actually almost separate from itself, so that reducer acts as a bit of a carrier as well. It allows the paint to be thinned, and it just allows for it to just basically keep all of its properties intact. So you'll notice I'm not just airbrushing flat textures, I'm starting to build some of that detailing. So I'm just referring back to my reference as I do this. I'm, as you can see, working up nice and close. So I'm resting on the surface, hence why I've got the glove on my left hand. So obviously if you're left-handed with the airbrush, put it on your right hand, and then that way you're not going to contaminate the surface, because this is an automotive project which will get 2-pack cleared at the end. I don't want any oils or handprints or any contaminants going onto the surface, so that's why I wear the glove. You're totally covered. So you can see and watch my trigger finger. I've got the air pressed down, I'm up nice and close, and I'm moving that trigger back and forth to allow for that fine sort of stippling action to happen within that eye section of the eagle, and then that'll transfer onto the beak as well. And then different strokes to create the feathery appearance. So more like tight little dagger strokes, so going from thin to thick to thin, and then also thick to thin. So I'm just tapering those strokes as I go. Keeping myself nice and steady when I'm painting, especially when I'm doing nice definite lines. I want to keep the airbrush moving so I don't get a heavy build-up of the paint. And I'm being cautious to keep nice and tight with my airbrushing so that I'm not getting overspray in unwanted areas. As you can see, I haven't got a mask around the eagle, so once that paper template went on, and I sprayed my base colour, that's pretty much it. I will go back and maybe utilise some freehand templates, but all in all I'm going to just freehand this from there on in. If you're not comfortable with that and you don't have the sort of control as yet, then by all means do a negative mask, or do one out of either application tape works really well, you can cut that out, or just vinyl spray mask vinyl like I use in my other videos, but leave it on the surface and that'll give you that nice crisp edge. And if this is the first time watching one of my videos, welcome. For anyone else that's been watching for a while, welcome back. If you are enjoying this content, feel free to give it a thumbs up and share it out. That will help to build this community and hopefully help some other people with their airbrushing. And if you haven't already, feel free to hit subscribe. Tap on that bell icon, that'll notify you every time I put out new content. I generally do new tutorials or videos weekly and plenty of other airbrush related content in amongst it all. So just taking my time to really add in all the detail, even at this stage. So you can really start to see how the eagle head is starting to shape up, even just by having that grey underpainting and the white highlights on top. I'm getting a lot of tonal variation, which is what I want, and the textures are starting to build nicely. For anyone that is interested in what products I am using, I will pop some links in the description below, so be sure to check them out. So for some of these softer highlights that I'm doing at the moment, I am further away. So in this case you need to be extremely careful. As you can see, I'm very close to the edge of that beak and I don't want to risk getting any overspray on that red. It's a candy red, so it obviously doesn't look like it right now because it's not cleared, but once the clear goes back on, that has a bit of a metallic in it as well, and I don't want to contaminate that with any flat white colour. So now that I've almost completed the texturing of this white on the beak section, I'm going to go ahead and utilize the white again. This time I'm using it for the tips of the feathers. So just picking out some of those highlights. I'm going to tone over them at a later stage, but I just want to build that white to start to get some of that underpainting happening and a bit more detail in that section. So whenever you're doing feathers or even fur for that matter, it's a process of just building layer upon layer upon layer. And by creating those layers, you're going to create that sense of depth. So it's going to give your artwork a lot more of a realistic appearance. And just coming in nice and close for the final touch, which is the little white highlight in the eye. So up nice and close and just carefully pulling back on that trigger to create that white highlight. Okay, so here's a couple of photos of just a quick recap of what I went through in this video. So you can see the underpainting and the darker value toning from the paper templates, and then the stage that we're up to right now with the white highlights completed, as well as all the detailing that I added in with that white, all that stippling. So I do hope that you enjoyed part 1 of this video, and thanks again for watching, and until next time, go grab your airbrush, do some amazing artwork yourself, and I'll see you again very, very soon. Bye for now.